All right, so I'm going to show you hot water treatment, and it sounds really intimidating, but it's actually a really simple process. My setup here is to just lay out a bunch of bowls and put the seeds in there. I put a little square of paper with the name, it's underneath the bowl. See that? So that I can kind of see through it and tell what I'm looking at. You could also draw a map or otherwise keep track of what seeds that you're going to be treating, because otherwise it's really hard to tell. You don't want to get them mixed up at anywhere in the process. These bowls over here, I've already got with some water. That's actually just room temperature water. Those are various fruits that I am using a soaking technique in order to soften the fruit so I can access the seeds inside. And so I just heard my kettle go off with boiling water. And so simply, hot water treatment is just pour hot water enough to coat the seeds in each one of these bowls. And now all you have to do is get the water up to the boiling point, pour them on top, and then there's no need to keep the water at a hot temperature. So it can get back down to room temperature. And you'll want to soak most of the time overnight, but every once in a while for a few days in the water. And a lot of the seeds, especially these pea family seeds, are going to plump up really nice as they absorb the water. And that's the thing. To know whether your seed needs hot water treatment or not, I recommend getting a good seed resource like Dara Emery's Seed Propagation Native California Plants. This will lay out the treatments you need for different seeds. But after a little bit of experience, you start to realize certain groups of plants are more likely to want hot water treatment. So number one, I can tell you pretty much anything in the pea family, which is Fabaceae, is going to want hot water treatment. So that's things like Thermopsis here, and Amorpha, and chaparral pea, which is Picaringia, and sulfur pea with his Lathyrus. And so there's only a few other ones that might want hot water treatment, like this Fremontodendron over here, and most of the time those are fire adapted, and so they like the heat and not necessarily the chemicals and the smoke in order to break their seed dormancy. So yeah, that's pretty much hot water treatment. Okay, so now that my seeds have soaked for about 24 hours, and these are all species that require a 24-hour soak, sometimes it might need more. This is the process of actually setting up the seeds. We have two groups of seeds here. We have some that require a stratification period and some that can be planted directly. And so stratification is essentially, at least cold stratification, there's also hot stratification, is just it needs a certain period of time at a certain temperature in order to break its dormancy. So cold stratification needs cold temperatures, warm stratification needs warm temperatures. These are all species here that require cold stratification. It can really vary a lot between the species, and so one easy way to do that is to prepare the seeds and to put them in the fridge. I use my crisper drawer for this period during the winter. And the other way to do it, if you live in an appropriate area, is to just do it directly outdoors. So essentially what stratification doing is mimicking the turn of the season. So it has to go through a winter period, and once it starts to warm up in the springtime, then the seed dormancy has broken and they will germinate, and this will make sure that the seedlings don't freeze by germinating too early in the winter. So essentially, if you live in a good area where you get cold temperatures during the winter, you can just direct seed a lot of the cold stratified stuff outside and not in a greenhouse or anything. You want it to be open to the elements, and that will work as far as stratification goes. But doing it in the refrigerator, if you can spare the space, gives you a little bit more control. You don't take up as much space planting outside directly. And you can kind of check on the seeds and see when they germinate, and then you're just going to look for them to send out a little radicle, that first little root that comes out of the seed when it first germinates. And once they have that radicle, you can go ahead and plant them outside, and then all of the ones that have germinated are viable seed and are worth the pot and the soil that you're putting them into. So essentially, here's my setup here. Got a plate, got a paper towel, and then lastly, I have a bag. And the bag is labeled with the name, chaparral P we're going to do here, the date you're starting the stratification, and how long it's supposed to stratify for. So in this case, it's a 1-month stratification starting on December 23rd. So January 23rd, some of these might start to germinate. And so right around that date, probably a couple days before even, you'll want to start checking them, because it's an approximate date. It might take longer than 1 month. You don't really know. So it's just to give a guideline of like, oh, I need to go in the fridge and check these seeds and make sure they're germinating. Because one thing you don't want to do in this method is wait too long to check them, because the radicals will actually grow through the paper towel and get stuck in there. You can break the roots and it can be not so good for the plant. So anyway, here's my technique for getting them from the water in the bowls and getting them into the bag. And essentially all I do is pour out all of the seeds and the water onto the paper towel, just like so. And then I try to spread out the seeds a little bit and get a little bit of separation going so they're not all clumped together. And then fold over the ends on top of the seeds to hold them in place. And then lift it up out of the water and kind of shake out as much of that water as you can. Yeah, that's pretty good. Then we'll put it back in the bowl, fold over the ends, and squeeze out a little bit of the extra water. You want it to be pretty moist, but not super moist. There's like a sweet spot. It's not an exact science though. And that's it. You're done. You put it in the bag. Make sure you seal it completely. And I like to get some of the air out of there so I can fit more seeds in my drawer. And there you go. That's going to go in your fridge. And then in a month, I'm going to open this up. I'm going to carefully unfold the paper towel. I'm going to check on the seeds, and I will see if they are germinated or not. And essentially, the paper towel holds the moisture, and the plastic bag seals that in, so you don't have to add water to it throughout the season. It'll just be wet for months. So that's essentially the stratification period. And I'm going to do this with the rest of the seeds here, and then we'll do a little bit of direct seeding. So I'm out in my little native nursery, and it's a little paltry right now. These are just some of the things that I'm holding over and trying to grow for next year's sale, like this Diplicus grandiflorus, the orange bush monkey flower, and these coral bells, these heuchera. I think it's micrantha, this is the species of this one. In any case, I want to talk a little bit about the other seed treatment things, which I did not demonstrate, and that's because I rarely use them. One of them is called scarification. Scarification processes basically involve taking a piece of sandpaper and rubbing the seeds, or taking a knife and nicking a corner of the seed coat off. And that's the idea, is essentially you want to break the seed coat. It's the seed coat itself is what's leading to the dormancy of the seed. And so if you break the seed coat, then it will germinate out of that hole or out of that weak spot that you've made from roughening it up with sandpaper. I find personally there's a lot of overlap between plants that call for scarification and those that need hot water treatment. And I prefer the hot water treatment. I've tried scarification a couple times. It's really easy to cut yourself with a knife while you're trying to nick the seed. It's really difficult and strenuous to rough up the surface of the seed coat with sandpaper, but there are a few that don't like the heat and would prefer the scarification. I just don't typically grow those. Another thing you could do is use hydrochloric acid. Who doesn't have hydrochloric acid lying around? So that's one of the main prohibitants from doing that. But certainly things like manzanita seeds. Typically, if you grow that in a nursery, you'll use acids to break down the seed coat and to break that seed dormancy. And there's several other ones that, even if they don't require the use of that, they might benefit from it. They might get a higher germination rate. And I'm struggling to think of any other ones. There's warm stratification. That's essentially putting it outside in the summer and letting it get warm and usually dry in a lot of cases. Things that come to mind are like Humboldt lily. Humboldt lily wants a warm period, a cool period, and then a warm period before it germinates. So you actually have to alternate, and if you're doing it totally indoors, outside from the natural environment, then you basically have to approximate that by putting it in the fridge, taking it out of the fridge, putting it back in the fridge, taking it out of the fridge again. It can be kind of treacherous to deal with. So wouldn't recommend plants like that for beginners. Look for plants if you're just getting started, require no treatment, or maybe hot water treatment, maybe cold stratification. It's not really that hard to put things in the fridge. And really just don't get your mind set on specific plants you want to grow now when you're first starting out. Let that develop over time, build your skill set, and then a couple years down the line, maybe you can attempt some of these more difficult ones. And to be honest, a lot of these seeds we don't know how to grow them. So you could be the one who cracks an easier method. And I want to join anyone who is a member of the Redbud chapter to come join our Facebook group. We have a propagation specific Facebook group called the Redbud CNPS propagation group, and there we have all sorts of documentation about how to grow these native plants, and we share tips and we give progress updates. And so people sort of pooling their experiences, and someone who lives at like 2,000 feet might have a totally different experience than someone who lives at 3,000 feet, and someone who's got an open living situation compared to someone who lives deep in the pine woods might have totally different plants that they'll be successful at growing, or different methodologies that they have to use to be successful at growing specific plants. So it's really valuable that we kind of pool our resources and share our experiences and talk about what we're growing. And yeah, all right, let's move on and do some direct planting. All right, so now I'm going to show you a bit about direct seeding and some of the methods that I use. Feel free to experiment. There's no tried and true way to do it. I've just been working on ways to conserve space, and I also am a little bit on the lazy side, so I want to get as many plants planted as possible utilizing the smallest amount of work. So anyway, this is what I do. I use these seed trays. You can usually get them for free or very cheap at any garden center. These ones I think I got from Isley Nursery in Auburn. And what you'll want to do is sanitize them using a 10% bleach solution. So I just fill a bin with a certain amount of bleach and add 10 times as much water, and then soak these for 10 minutes inside of that. And then once they're nice and sanitized, I will cut a square of landscape fabric and then put the landscape fabric inside the tray. And so you want to cut it a little bit larger than the dimensions of the pot, so that there's like, a little lip here. And that's just to keep all of the material inside. You don't want it slipping out and under the liner when you're watering it. And all this is really doing is keeping the planting material from falling through the holes at the bottom. And so then over here, I've got a batch of seed starting mix that I made up. I buy the bulk ingredients and mix it up myself just in these storage bins. And essentially what it is equal parts of vermiculite, perlite, and cocoa coir made of coconut husks. And so you can use peat instead of coconut husk, but I prefer the coconut husk because it's a little bit more sustainable and environmentally sound. And basically serves the same purpose. So you have vermiculite and cocoa coir, which will absorb water and retain it in there, so the medium stays moist. And then you have the perlite, which acts as drainage, so it allows water to escape. And the balance together, this is what's known as a soil-less mix. So there's no fertilizer, there's no, other than the cocoa coir, which breaks down a little bit, there's no organic matter in this. And so your plants aren't getting any food from this stuff, but they don't need it, because when they're seeds, they have all the food that they need to get going inside of their seed coat in a little endosperm there. And so eventually what you'll want to do once you see a couple leaves is you'll want to transplant these seeds out of the trays and into a actual pot. And that pot should have something like a potting soil or some kind of mix that does have nutrients available for the plant. But at this stage, no nutrients needed. You just want this nice mix. And I make sure I store this stuff really sterilely and make sure that it's not just like lying on the ground. And if I spill any on the ground, I'm not going to use it. All right, well, I'm sure I'll remember other things while we're doing it, but let's get started. I'm going to fill up this tray now. you just want to push it all the way to the corners. Make sure you get a nice nice amount in those corners there. They tend to get overlooked. And the depth you want to fill these to is a little below the rim, you know, maybe half an inch below the rim. And you'd be surprised, the seeds, they don't send their roots out too deep, and a lot of the times if they do happen to get pretty deep in there, they'll just start growing laterally, you know, to the side. And so I haven't found it to be a problem. This is not a method that you'd want to use on trees like oaks and pines and things like that have a big taproot, because the taproot will want to go straight down and you will be impeding that taproot and cause it to malform. So this is more for like shrubby perennials and wildflowers and things like that. All right, well, I'm going to go get the hose and we'll pick this up in a second. So we are just going to wet down and really soak all that potting mix in there. Because of the absorbency of the vermiculite and the coir, this could take a little bit, so I really like to go until there's a pretty good amount coming out of the bottom and soaking through. It can look wet on the top and actually be pretty dry underneath that top surface. So we're just going to make sure it gets plenty of water. All right, that should be good. All right, so we're all wet down, and I went ahead and made some labels. I'm going to put 4 species in here, so this is a lot of space, right? If you were planting a massive amount of one species, you could fill this entire thing up with seed, but I'm going to keep myself kind of limited. I want more diversity of species, so I'm going to split this into essentially 4 zones. So imagine walls here, and you can actually lay down, I've seen people lay down chopsticks to sort of delineate the border. And this one, maybe you could lay some rope across it or a little piece of wood, if that's safe to do. Of course, you got to worry about, you don't want to just pick up a stick off the ground and add it to your nice sanitized planting surface here. But in any case, I'm just going to imagine the zone here, and if there's a little bit of overflow, it should be fine. I should be able to tell these species apart when they're little sprouts. So we're going to go ahead and plant these. So I'm going to start here. I've got a colander, and I've got our bowl of the plants that we were growing before. And so I'm essentially just going to strain out the seeds. And just to save the water, I did it right into the seed pot, but you could do it off into the ground, that's fine. And I'm just going to take those seeds and plant them within that zone. I'm going to spread them out on the soil surface, kind of spaced out, but giving enough of a border that it's not likely that I confuse them with the seeds in the subsequent zones. And so different plants need different levels of depth when you're planting them. Bigger seeds, like these lemonade berry ones, they can be down, usually the trick is they can be down about as far as their longest diameter. So the length of this little seed here, if we can get it to focus, that's about, maybe what, half an inch or so. That's about as far down as you want to plant these. Little dust-like seeds, like the monkey flowers and carpentaria and stuff, you want to surface sow those. So you basically want to have them completely on the surface, no bearing whatsoever. And if anything, you want to sprinkle a little bit of the, like lay them on the surface and sprinkle a little bit more of the potting mix on top of them. So with these, I just kind of spread them out. You can see here, just spread out in the soil. And all I'm going to do is just push them down a little bit. It's a little simple method instead of making the holes first. And so now they're all in these little indented spots. I'm just going to take a little handful of potting mix and cover them up that way. And I like to do it this way for a couple reasons. If you make all the holes, you have to count all the seeds. It's a little bit of more of a production. So this is just, you lay the seeds out and push them in and you cover them up. And second of all, you can see the dry potting mix is a little bit of a different color. So I already know I planted there. And so I know I know what I've worked already and I know what I have to do next. So I'm going to go ahead and plant the rest of this one and let let's see, let's look at it in fast motion. How about that? Voila. Okay, and so the last step here is we just water this in. All right, and so you're planted and ready to go. Now you just wait for sprouts to come up. It's that simple. And you might have noticed I walk away to go get my hose, and that's because I keep my hose up on a hook. That is to keep the hose end off the ground, and it's just a really sanitary practice to make sure you're not introducing any soil-borne pathogens into your planting mix. And before we end for the day, I'm just going to go over one last thing. Let's say you don't have a seed tray, you don't want to buy landscape fabric. This is just a little bit too much out of your wheelhouse. You could just buy prepackaged, premixed seed starting mix. That's totally fine. You don't have to mix it yourself. And you could just use regular old pots. Totally fine. This is a gallon sized, pretty much overkill. You can use a container of any size. A little 4-inch pot, quart, really, any size pot you want, filled with the soil mix, and just repeat the same process and just put like one seed per. Sorry, one species per. So basically, if I've took this gallon right here, just fill it to the top, maybe about an inch below the ring, same process. Wet it down, add your seeds, add your label, water it in, and you're good to go. And so you don't necessarily need this setup, but this definitely allows you to grow a lot more plants, I find. The benefit to the taller pots is you might get a little bit better root development before you transplant, but it really depends on the species. Some plants send their roots down only an inch into the soil, and so you don't really need to worry about that. And other ones will send their roots really far down, and so this can be of benefit. So it's really worth experimenting, seeing what works for you, what works for the plants you want to grow, and figuring out a system for yourself. And I'm happy to have shared some of my system. And hopefully we'll be able to do another video in the future showing an update, showing the plants kind of sprouting in here, and a little bit of what the nursery looks like a little bit further down the line. So anyway, I want to thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful, happy holidays and a wonderful new year in 2021. Thanks, guys.